Hello, my name is Randolph, and the title of my session is Dev Team Moves from On-Premise .NET Development to the Salesforce1 Cloud. Here's how simple it can be. This is the second Dreamforce I've attended, and the first one I've attended as a presenter, and I'm honored to be here, honored to be speaking to you today. When I first attended Dreamforce last year, I noticed that there was three kinds of sessions, or I saw three kinds of sessions. One where world-class experts talked about their innovative ideas and work on the Salesforce platform. A second kind of session where people talked about the products and services that they're selling. And then a third kind of session where Salesforce customers talked about their experiences on the platform. I was really interested in that third kind of session, but I didn't see anybody speaking from my perspective. Everybody leading those kind of sessions seemed to be managers, directors, vice presidents. But I'm an IT developer, and I didn't see anybody speaking from my perspective. So I wanted to do a session that talked about what things looked like from my perspective. So, like I said, my name's Randolph Reif. I've got 14 years of development experience. I really like development. I like facing a problem, breaking that problem into smaller pieces, implementing the individual pieces, and seeing it all come back together into a working piece of software. I also love IT work. I love business rules, complex business rules, business processes, and trying to understand and automate those things. I work for Interactive Intelligence. It's a global company, and I work at its headquarters in Indianapolis, Indiana. We provide contact center, business process automation, and unified communication software. And that's a mouthful that might not mean a lot to you, but I think our CEO, Don Brown, says it best when he says simply, we help our customers turn customer service into a competitive weapon. All of our solutions revolve around that goal. So our software features a Salesforce integration, and if you're interested, we even have a booth set up here. I work for our company's IT department, so we support, enhance, and maintain our company's ordering systems, financial systems, customer support systems, and so on. When I started with our team 2 years ago, most of our systems were custom-developed .NET applications. And just to give you an idea of the kind of team that we were even considering writing our own CRM system before we became Salesforce customers. When I started with the team 2 years ago, none of us, including myself, had experience with Salesforce. Our systems, just like any systems in a company that's dynamic and entrepreneurial, sometimes they were complex, sometimes they were hard to maintain. It took an increasing amount of time and effort for our team, just to keep the lights on. And to give you an example, when I started, one of my first tasks was to debug a performance issue with one of our production systems. Every week to 2 weeks, this system would slow down. And over the course of a couple of hours, it would slow in its response time till it got to the point where it was totally unresponsive. It was a tedious issue to troubleshoot, took a lot of trial and error to figure out what was going on. When we did figure out what was going on, we realized that it was an issue that probably existed for a long time and was only now being exacerbated by our company's growth. The business was grateful that we could troubleshoot problems like these, but that's not really where they wanted us to be spending our time and effort. They really wanted us to be working on things, enhancing our systems, building out new systems that supported our company's changing business. It was in the midst of this situation that our sales department kind of went off on their own and started to implement Salesforce. And then they brought it back to our IT department to roll out to the entire enterprise. The business was enthusiastic about Salesforce. It was really surprising and different to see. And we knew it was just going to be a matter of time before our company would want our developers to be able to write customizations, extensions, and whole applications on the Salesforce platform. It was a challenge for our team, but it was also an opportunity for us to reconnect with the business and reconnect with their goals and priorities. So, in my session today, I'm going to talk about the journey that we made from the point I just described to the point where we are now, where I think we're a pretty strong and competent Salesforce development team. I'll describe episodes in our journey along these 3 points. What did we need to know to get started? Where did we start? And where do we think we're going next? And the intent of this is to provide you with tips, suggestions, and ideas for a journey you or your team might be making. So first, what did we need to know to get started? So our company has a Salesforce subscription that gives us access to an extensive amount of online training. When I last looked, there's over 120 courses that we have access to. So one of the first questions that we faced was, which course should we start with? Which of these 120 should we start with? So we're developers, we're coders, so we went straight into the ones that talked about programming, the Apex development course, the Visualforce course. Some of that made sense, and some of it didn't make sense. For example, within Visualforce, there's that input text tag. If you've done any web development at all, that tag makes sense. You'd be able to predict the kind of HTML it's going to generate, the kind of attributes it's going to have. But there were some things that didn't make sense. And the things that didn't make sense were the Visualforce page, the context in which the Visualforce page lived. We didn't understand that a Visualforce page could override an object's view. We didn't understand that a Visualforce page could be a tab and that a tab could be grouped into applications. We didn't understand these high-level ways of composing applications within the Salesforce platform. So when we realized that, we backed out of this course and got into more courses that focused on declarative functionality. And by declarative functionality, I mean things like tabs, applications, page layouts, record types. These kind of clicks, not code features. And so my first recommendation is, if you're getting started on the Salesforce platform, is to start by learning these declarative features. They're not just for administrators, and they're not just for business users, and they're not just prerequisites that you need to trudge through in order to get to the good stuff. Sometimes, in and of themselves, they're sufficient for application development. Other times, they're needed to set the stage for programmatic enhancements. Even now that we have more experience, we really need to restrain ourselves from the temptation to start coding right away and to think, well, wait a second, what does Salesforce offer out of the box for the problem we're trying to tackle? What kind of declarative features are out there? Also, as we got started learning, we realized that we couldn't just cherry pick the features that we wanted to learn about. If we did so, I think we would have risked reusing and possibly misusing the same limited set of tools and techniques. In addition, I think we would have risked having only haphazard success. What we needed was kind of a broad foundation so that we understood the different choices that we had available to us. In one way we got that broad foundation was through the Salesforce certification program. So with the developer certification, it requires that you know options that are available to you for business logic, user interface, and the data model. These kind of key dimensions of development. The advanced developer certification requires that you know the programmatic options that are available to you. You have a programming assignment as part of the certification, and you need to complete that assignment, showing that you know the best, that you're making the best possible selections for the problems you have in front of you. I have the advanced developer certification, and I've got a little bit of additional confidence because of it, knowing that I wrote code and that someone evaluated that code and awarded me a certification based on it. It's not just something that someone could pass after reading a brain dump. Within 1 year of being exposed to the Salesforce platform, 5 developers on our team earned the developer certification. And I think it's been great for us in terms of it helped get us up to speed quickly, and it also ensured that we were all starting from the same kind of foundation. We're not consultants, we're not winning additional business because we're certified, but I think it's definitely been helpful for us in that it's communicated both to our managers and to the business that we had a development team that was ready to do Salesforce development. So I recommend that you consider certifications as you're getting started. And even if you don't go through with the tests and all of that, to at least look at the certification objectives. I think it's valuable that Salesforce very clearly and very concisely explains, what they expect developers to know and the basic tools and techniques they expect developers to be familiar with. We also found that it wasn't just enough to know these declarative features, and it wasn't just enough to know the options that we had available to us. we really had to know our own organization. We had to know how our Salesforce instance was set up. It was especially important for us because developers weren't involved in the setup of our organization. And just to give you an example, we wrote a very simple Visualforce page early on, and that Visualforce page updated some contact records. Well, it worked fine in our developer sandbox, but when we moved it to a full sandbox, we got some errors that we didn't expect. And it turns out that those errors were the result of a dupe catcher application that we have. So in our developer sandbox, the configuration data on which that dupe catcher depends wasn't present, so it was in effect turned off. In our full sandbox, that configuration data was present, so it was turned on, so it was actively looking for duplicate contacts, and we were testing with some duplicate contacts, and that's why it was throwing errors. So, we needed to understand that we had this application, what this application did, how it was configured, and we needed to know that so that we would know how to write code correctly that behaved well with it. With the Salesforce platform especially, you might not be in control of each of the pieces, but each of the pieces need to fit together to form a kind of coherent system. So I recommend that you understand your organization's applications, triggers, workflows, and validation rules. It's not like .NET code in the sense that you can just look through source code and get a sense of how an application's working. You really need to look in a few different places to see what's going on and what potentially impacts users and what potentially affects the user's flow through the application. And especially when you're working with enhancements to the built-in Salesforce functionality, you can't just come in with blinders focusing on only your project's requirements. You really need a much broader perspective on things. So I talked earlier about this online training that we viewed, and I want to be clear that I think that there was benefits from two sources. There's benefits from the training itself, the content of the training, but there was also benefits from the fact that we watched it together as a team. Before each session and after each session, we always had discussions. We would ask each other questions. We would find out that one person understood something a little bit different than another. Those discussions, the fact that we watched it together was definitely helpful, and that it helped to level among ourselves what we knew. And it also gave us an opportunity to kind of reinforce what we were learning. So I recommend that you be part of some community as you're learning the Salesforce platform. Maybe that community is just your development team. Maybe that community is an online community, like the collaboration groups in the Salesforce Success community. One of the best online communities that I know of is the Salesforce Stack Exchange site. If you're not familiar with Stack Exchange, they've got a number of question and answer sites for different technologies. But I think their Salesforce site is just simply excellent, just a great source of information, very helpful people, very good information. So I highly recommend that as an online community to be a part of. So these were some of the key aspects of our initial learning. So, where did we put that learning to use? How did we get started? Where did we get started? So one place that I like to start with is just experiments. When I do .NET development, I like to use a tool called LinkPad. Just third-party applications, very simple. With that application, I can write one line or a few lines of C# code, sketch out something, and execute it. I don't have to worry about creating a full class. I don't have to worry about whether I'm creating a console application or a Windows application. With it, I can just write a quick bit of code and execute it. In Salesforce, a very similar thing exists. Salesforce has that developer console, this nearly full IDE that's built into the user interface. With that developer console, there's the Execute Anonymous window. In there, I can type one line of Apex, a few lines of Apex, and execute it. I can test whether something works. I can test whether something works the way I think that it works. And I also can see how something works. Each execution potentially generates a log file that shows the steps that the platform's going through as it executes code. This Execute Anonymous window, it takes so little to set up. I don't think there's any good reason to just guess at how something works or to just wait and see. It's just very easy to go out there and try it. One of our first real projects on the Salesforce platform was integrations. So it was, we were working in .NET code, working in Visual Studio, working in these tools and technologies we were familiar with, and we were calling into the Salesforce platform. So we were querying contact data, and it gave us an opportunity to use SOCL, the Salesforce query language. This code was writing and executing SOCL statements to return contact data. And out of that experience, we realized the value of the API documentation. When we first got started with Salesforce development, we thought, well, the API documentation only talks about the API and calling into Salesforce externally. But it's also an excellent source of information about the standard Salesforce objects and their built-in fields. And that knowledge is valuable not just for API use, but also for SOCL, also for Apex, and there's other applicability as well. So it's a great source of information. One unexpected place where we got started with Salesforce development was working with an application development vendor. And just to be totally honest, I think as an in-house developer working with an application development vendor, it's kind of a threat. You know, sometimes these vendors, they've just got more resources and more tools and more ability to focus than in-house developers have. This picture is not a picture of me, but it shows the kind of suspicion and hesitation I felt when I first started working with the vendor. The vendor was brought in to write a quoting system for us. And one good thing that occurred out of this relationship is that they were able to meet with our developers once a week to explain how they were building the application, kind of the decisions that they were going through. I mean, of course, they had other meetings to talk about the project's progress and all of that, but there was time set aside where we could just talk about technical things and how they were building out the application. This vendor very quickly built a decent-sized application, and in our environment, it gave us something that was much more substantial than anything that we were seeing through online training or elsewhere online. In this application that they built for us, it substantially lowered the bar for us in terms of what we needed to do to get started. You know, our first project didn't have to be, building out a huge system within Salesforce. You know, our first projects could be making modifications to this system. So it was a quoting system, and one of the first modifications was adding the ability to clone quotes. One of our second projects was to modify some of the documentation generated by this system. Eventually, we built our way up to the point where we built out a whole parts rule subsystem, ensuring that quotes were valid in terms of the parts that were included within a quote and how those related to the quote themselves. And so I recommend that you consider working alongside an application development vendor as you get started in the Salesforce platform. And also, something that we picked up from the vendor, to consider using third-party applications as application building blocks. You know, this vendor came in, went through the App Exchange, selected a general template application from the App Exchange, and then used that to build out some of the quote documentation. I don't think that that's something that we would have thought of on our own, and I was glad to have the vendor suggest that and to set that out as a model for us. So since then, we've done a number of other projects. This quoting system that I just described, it's evolved into a full ordering system. We've implemented communities for our partners and just have done a number of other things on the platform. So, where do we think we're going next? One thing that we're trying to do is just to follow the platform, to keep up with the platform. For one thing, we need to do this for our certifications. With the Salesforce certification, they require that we keep up with release exams. For each release that Salesforce pushes out, we need to complete a release exam to keep up with it. But even aside from the certifications, each release can change how we code and when exactly we need to code. With each release, we can incur a little bit of technical debt where we didn't necessarily intend for there to be technical debt up front. And just to give you an example of that, about a year and a half ago, we had to write a trigger because we wanted data tied to an account owner's user object pulled down onto the account. Trigger was the best way to do that at the time. With the Summer 13 release, we were now able to do that with formula fields. Because we kept up with the platform, we knew that what we had done was no longer the best way of doing things, so we knew not to repeat that again. In addition, we knew that we needed to look out for an opportunity to remove that trigger. I'm a runner, and I think following the platform is a little bit like running. They're similar in the sense that people who don't do either think, oh, that must be painful to do. That's so excruciating. How can that be fun? But I think both running and following the platform, they're good, stimulating, invigorating things. They're fun. And so I recommend that you complete the new release training when it's available, attend the Salesforce webinars, and also to attend Dreamforce. And I think it's easy. We're all here attending Dreamforce, and we're stimulated by some of the ideas and discussions that we're hearing. But with each new release, there's the potential that those same kind of opportunities to be stimulated, to learn something. One other thing that we're trying to do is to grow the development community. When I talked about community in an earlier slide, I talked about a bunch of developers sitting together watching some online training. But we're really trying to grow the development community beyond just developers. And just to give you two examples, we're trying to grow the development community so that it includes administrators as well. Administrators are the first line of support to users. They're closer to users. They know their pain points. They know opportunities for improvement. And so those are valuable perspectives to have in the development process. In addition, administrators have their own plans for how they want to arrange profiles, how they want to arrange permission sets. It's important for administrators to have those plans. And it's important for developers to follow those plans, to provide feedback when necessary, but largely to follow those plans. We're also trying to incorporate business users more into the development process. Of course, business users give the initial requirements, they're stakeholders, they initiate projects, and so on. But business users sometimes have valuable technical input. And it's not like that in the .NET world. A business user is never going to suggest a NuGet package to use. But within the Salesforce world, a business user might know a new feature. They might be very familiar with a new feature that's not familiar to a developer. Or a business user may be familiar with an application that a developer is not familiar with. And it's important to vet those suggestions, but it's also important to listen to them when they're valid. So I recommend that you consider engaging administrators and business users in the development process. One way our team's trying to do that is through an agile development methodology, which we're recently starting to implement. I think about its concept of a project community and also some of the techniques it has related to removing barriers between people and including more people up front. I think that's really going to improve our projects, and I look forward to the impact that it's going to have. So this has been what we've learned, where we started, and where we're planning to go next. And I hope it's provided some insights and ideas for your own journey. So we've got some time left over for questions. So if anyone has questions, if you please want to step up to the mic so that we can all hear you.
Thank you. That was a good presentation.
Thank you.
I have a question about the cultural differences between the .NET developers, because we have some .NET developers who've been working on the .NET platform forever. And then jumping into the Salesforce platform is kind of like an intrusion. So did you experience any of that, and how did you, if you did, what did you do to overcome those challenges?
We did experience those some. But I think the important thing is I'd say two things. That there's a lot of technical depth to the Salesforce platform that might not be apparent initially. So to encourage your developers, these folks who have hesitation, to explore that depth. And then second of all, that there's ways to leverage that .NET talent within Salesforce to do things like the Canvas applications and so forth, where you can surface other applications within Salesforce. So I would have those two suggestions. But I think one thing that was really appealing for me was the business excitement about Salesforce, and that working in Salesforce, developing within Salesforce, gave me a chance to make the business happy. So if you've got people on your team that have the same kind of mentality, then to focus on that and if that same kind of culture exists within your company, where you've got business users who are excited, emphasize that point possibly. So thanks.
So you've had a lot of .NET applications that touch different parts of the business, I'm assuming, right?
Yes.
How did you deal with the transition to leave those legacy systems in place and implement Salesforce, and how did you bridge the gap between the two systems?
Well, we're still bridging that gap, to be honest. I mean, we still do have a number of the systems that I had described earlier on, but now they're just in conjunction with Salesforce. And we're trying to move more of them into Salesforce and to rewrite a number of them in different ways. So I think, any business system, it's got a certain lifespan, and I think many of ours are at the tail end of their lifespan. So we're hoping to, as they get to the end of that lifespan, and as we've got the opportunity to replace them in ways that'll be much more compatible with Salesforce.
So you let them stand alone. You don't try to access the data that they were creating and
Well, we do have a master data hub where we're pulling data into, and then from that point is exposing that to different systems, including Salesforce. So it's all I can say is that it's tricky. It's tricky, and I don't think we've got the magic silver bullet that kills it all.
Fair enough.
But it's just
Good presentation, though.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Any other questions? Cool. Well, thank you very much for attending. We appreciate it.